Before we begin, today's video discusses serious topics, including bullying and mental health struggles. My goal is to share an honest, unfiltered look at these cultural dynamics to help other tutors and creators stay safe. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a local professional. This is a space for awareness and support. Bullying is one of those topics that exists everywhere in the world but looks and feels completely different depending on the culture you are in. Today I want to talk about how bullying shows up differently in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, and then connect that to something most people outside the ESL industry would never think to link it to, the rating system on online tutoring platforms. Everything I am sharing here is based on observations from documentaries, things I have noticed online, and genuine conversations with students over the years. I want to approach this with care because the topic is serious, the consequences in some cases are tragic, and the people affected are real. Let's start with Japan. Bullying in Japan tends to be less about physical confrontation and more about social exclusion, a form of harm that is quieter, harder to prove, and in many ways more psychologically damaging than overt aggression. The Japanese term for this type of bullying is iijime, and it describes a pattern where a person is deliberately excluded from the group. They are ignored. People pretend they do not exist. Conversations stop when they enter the room. They are left out of group activities, group chats, and social gatherings without explanation. To someone unfamiliar with Japanese social culture, this might sound less serious than physical bullying. But in a society where group belonging is deeply tied to a person's sense of identity, security, and daily functioning, being deliberately erased from the social fabric of your school or workplace is genuinely devastating. The damage is invisible to adults and authority figures, which makes it easy to deny and difficult to address. Victims often suffer in silence because the very social isolation that constitutes the bullying also removes the support network they would need to report it or recover from it. Online bullying in Japan follows the same pattern of indirect harm, but takes on a specific form that is shaped by Japanese digital culture. In Japan, it is quite common for people to maintain multiple online accounts, one public account connected to their real identity that they use for professional networking and maintaining social appearances, and one or more anonymous accounts where they engage with hobbies, opinions, and communities they prefer to keep separate from their public image. This dual account system exists because Japanese social culture places enormous pressure on people to present a controlled, appropriate public face. Your anonymous account is where you can be who you actually are without social consequences. For most people, this means simply engaging with interests they find embarrassing to admit publicly, anime, gaming, fandoms. But for some people, the anonymity becomes a vehicle for expressing hostility, cruelty, and criticism that they would never attach their real name to. The gap between the polished public face and the anonymous online behavior can be enormous, and the people on the receiving end of that anonymous hostility are dealing with genuine psychological harm from someone who faces essentially no accountability. South Korea presents a somewhat different picture. Bullying in Korean schools and workplaces has received significant public attention in recent years, partly because of high-profile cases involving celebrities and public figures who came forward about their experiences, and partly because of documented research showing the serious mental health consequences of bullying in Korean society. Unlike Japan's pattern of exclusion and indirect harm, bullying in South Korea can include more direct forms of physical and verbal aggression, particularly in school environments. The social hierarchy that exists among Korean students, heavily influenced by academic performance, family background, and physical appearance, creates conditions where those perceived as lower status become vulnerable targets. South Korea has taken legislative steps to address this seriously. There are now rules in place that allow universities to reject college applications from students who have a documented history of bullying, even if their academic grades are excellent. This is a significant policy shift that treats bullying as a character issue rather than a youthful mistake that can be left behind, and it reflects the growing recognition that the harm caused by bullying deserves real consequences for the person responsible. The connection between bullying culture and high suicide rates in both Japan and South Korea is something that cannot be ignored in this conversation. Both countries have documented and widely discussed struggles with suicide, and bullying, both offline and online, is consistently identified as a contributing factor. The pressure to maintain a perfect public image, the social consequences of being seen as weak or different, the lack of safe spaces to express genuine distress, and the anonymity that allows cruelty to be delivered without accountability all combine to create environments where people who are already struggling can feel completely trapped. Celebrities in both countries have died by suicide after campaigns of online harassment, and ordinary students and workers face versions of the same dynamic at a smaller scale, but with equally serious consequences for individuals and families. The Philippines approaches this very differently, and the difference is rooted in how Filipino culture handles communication, criticism, and social expression in general. Growing up in the Philippines, the concept of bullying as a formally recognized harmful behavior was not always clearly named or consistently addressed. What happened instead was a culture of verbal directness, jokes at each other's expense, teasing within families, criticism expressed openly, that was largely normalized as part of social interaction. This is not the same as saying Filipino culture endorses cruelty. It is saying that the boundary between teasing and bullying was often blurry, and the expectation was that people would develop a certain resilience through exposure to it. The positive side of this cultural orientation is that Filipinos who grow up in this environment often develop a thicker skin and a genuine capacity to handle criticism without being destroyed by it. When a Filipino celebrity faces online criticism, there is almost always a vocal community of supporters who push back loudly and publicly, because Filipinos express both their criticism and their support openly, using their real accounts and their real names. The support is as public as the attack, which changes the dynamic considerably compared to countries where anonymous criticism floods in with no visible counterresponse. This brings us to the online bullying comparison between cultures. In Japan and South Korea, online criticism tends to be delivered anonymously, which gives it a particular quality of sustained, unaccountable cruelty that is difficult for victims to address or respond to. In the Philippines, even online hostility tends to come from accounts connected to real identities, which means there is a degree of accountability baked in. If you say something cruel publicly under your real name, people who know you can respond to it. Your social reputation is on the line alongside the target's. This accountability does not eliminate online cruelty in the Philippines, but it does create a different social ecosystem around it, one where fighting back is possible and normalized, and where community support tends to be loud and immediate. Now, let's connect all of this to ESL tutoring platforms, because this is where the cultural patterns we have been discussing show up in a context that directly affects working tutors. The rating system on most tutoring platforms can be used as a tool for targeted harm, and it is worth understanding how and why this happens. One pattern that experienced tutors notice involves highly rated tutors being deliberately targeted by students who have no genuine interest in learning. These students monitor profiles for rare open slots because highly rated tutors fill up quickly, and when they manage to book a session, their intention is not to practice English. Their intention is to leave a negative comment on a profile they could not normally access. There is a status element to this behavior. Seeing your name attached to a comment on a prestigious tutor's profile, in a context where you got to be the person who criticized someone everyone else admires, delivers a specific kind of satisfaction to someone who is motivated by that kind of power. It costs them very little. It can cost the tutor meaningful visibility and income. The opposite pattern also exists. Some students deliberately seek out tutors with low ratings, going to the last pages of search results rather than the first, specifically to add to the pile of negative feedback. They read existing comments looking for patterns, identify complaints that previous students have made, and either repeat those same complaints or construct new ones designed to reinforce the narrative of a struggling tutor. The motivation here is similar: the opportunity to exercise a form of power over someone else in a space where the tutor has very limited ability to respond or defend themselves. Understanding why this happens requires going back to the cultural context. In environments where people are heavily pressured to maintain a polished and agreeable public face in daily life, the anonymity or low-stakes environment of an online review section can function as a release valve for everything that could not be expressed in face-to-face interaction. The person who is required to be deferential, restrained, and conflict-free in their professional and social life may find a genuine psychological outlet in the ability to be critical, judgmental, and powerful in a digital space where the social consequences are minimal. This does not excuse the behavior, but it does explain the pattern, and understanding a pattern is the first step toward protecting yourself from it. For tutors dealing with this reality, the practical advice is specific. Avoid opening slots too far in advance, because students who are specifically looking for opportunities to book and review are more likely to be scanning upcoming availability rather than searching for immediate classes. Opening during peak hours. When genuine students are actively looking for lessons and slots fill quickly with real bookings, reduces the window of opportunity for targeted harassment. On weekends especially, when traffic is highest, opening slots on the day rather than days in advance means you are more likely to be booked by someone who actually wants the lesson rather than someone who's been waiting for their chance. Bullying, whether in a school hallway in Seoul, an online comment section in Tokyo, or a tutoring platform review box, is ultimately about the same thing. It is about the desire to have power over someone else in a space where normal social accountability does not apply. Naming it, understanding it, and preparing for it does not make it disappear. But it does make it smaller, and smaller is something you can manage. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful or relatable, please subscribe to join my journey toward 2,000 videos. On this channel, I share unfiltered ESL stories, yes, even the toxic ones, alongside Japanese and Korean language tips, my plants, my pets, and the reality of solo living. If you'd like to support my work and help me build my retirement fund, you can buy a treat for my pets via the link in the description below. Every bit of support helps keep this channel independent and growing. See you in the next one.